let's kick things off. Let's get going. So, well, welcome everyone for tonight. Those of you who are able to join live, and anyone who watches on the replay, we are here tonight to talk about working with clients in the gut health niche specifically. You can see on screen with me is Ashley Sauvé, and she's here to talk tonight about how to stop winging it with your clients and wasting their time and money and energy on protocols that fail to address the root cause. So in the webinar tonight, she's going to cover the importance of supporting gut health as a natural health professional, do a bit of an introduction to the GI map testing, which I know a lot of you have really been looking forward to, and then also talk about some common mistakes that she sees clinicians making while they're developing protocols and how to avoid them in your practice. So Ashley Sauvé is a certified holistic nutritionist and also a clinical herbalist, and she supports clients all over the world who struggle with their gastrointestinal health. Her practice specializes in holistic care for gut health concerns, and she has a focus on functional testing, therapeutic nutrition, and botanical therapies. So welcome, Ashley. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks for the intro, Veronica. For those of you guys who are out tonight or catching the replay, I'm a Canadian girl. So my practice is actually located up in Northern Ontario. I was in Toronto until 2020, and then the pandemic hit and I decided that that was not where I wanted to be during the apocalypse. So my partner and I moved about 6 hours north. We ended up buying a clinic. So I think I'm the only person on earth who opened a brick and mortar business during the pandemic. But he is a hands-on practitioner. So we needed like a physical space. And now we have this cute kind of natural health center that is kind of the only thing of its kind up here in Northern Ontario. But I do run a virtual practice as well. And most of my work is in my kind of virtual clinic because we are quite small and rural and got to be able to branch out of your local community. In addition to private practice, where I'm working with clients every day who struggle with chronic gastrointestinal issues, I also run a clinical mentorship program and work in clinical mentorship with other natural health professionals. I am a big believer in like coming together and sharing our failures and sharing the mistakes that we made along the way. And if a mistake that I made, you don't have to make, and you can evolve faster than I got to, then the whole industry wins. So I'm really into that. Our clinical mentorship, I'll chat a little bit about later. It runs once a year in the fall, and it is very exciting. So if you're wanting to get into more of this kind of thing after tonight's chat, definitely stick around for that. In terms of how I actually got into kind of specializing in GI health, it sort of started with my own story. I was diagnosed with celiac disease in my late teens. And long story short, I applied the therapeutic diet that I was given and didn't feel 100% better. And that was when I was given the IBS label. And that was when I really started going down kind of the rabbit hole of just this concept that maybe not all food that's on the market is all equally as helpful for us. It was not a topic of conversation in my home growing up, was not even something that was on my radar. I was like, great, the gluten-free version of Oreos. We have actual gluten-free Oreos now, but back in the day, it was like you had to order from a website where they were kept in someone's basement. It was like $12.99. It was a whole thing. But to me, that was no different than eating an apple, like a snack's a snack, right? Not so much. So at this time, I was actually studying anthropology and archaeology and fancied myself something of like an Indiana Jones kind of type. But I got really into this question of like, what are we even supposed to be eating? How do we even get here? Like, what is in these gluten-free Oreos? And that was when I switched my degree and I went to school for nutrition. So after I graduated with my degree in applied nutrition, I immediately went to working at a naturopathic doctor's office. And in this setting, I really credit this today with how I've been able to evolve my practice and build such a successful practice when I see so many of my colleagues struggling to do the same thing, because I was given access to tools that we were absolutely not taught about in school. Functional testing was standard of care in that clinic. I was taught how to interpret labs that I had never heard of before. I was taught how to implement those findings into protocols that would actually help the individuals that I was working with. And I feel like this really accelerated how I was able to build my own practice. Over the years, I've gone down every single rabbit hole for myself and my clients, from food sensitivity testing to SIBO. I had a whole like fertility and hormonal health program that I was running at one time. We were doing micronutrient panels. I worked at an IV lounge. The list goes on. I could be here all night. But what I found time and time again is whatever I was looking at, as soon as we peeled back one layer, we were in the gut. So whether we were looking at PCOS or infertility or ADHD or Alzheimer's, endocrine disorders, neurological disorders, whatever it was, as soon as you get one or two layers deep, you are back at the gut. And this is where I really bring my philosophy into my practice. In my kind of marketing, I'm trying to attract people who have chronic digestive issues. But as a practitioner, I believe that whatever you are specializing in, you have to have a strong understanding of and ability to work with intestinal physiology. Otherwise, what we end up doing is just putting people on a bunch of herbs or supplements to manage their symptoms. And like, hey, we all could have gone to medical school if we wanted to do that. We chose a different path because that entire framework didn't resonate with us. But if we end up just giving people a bunch of pills for their ills, we are doing the same thing. Even though it's 100% organic, natural Band-Aids, we are still taking a Band-Aid solution. So I think that looking at the gut is really the way to get out of that, build your own new framework, and actually help people heal. So quick overview of what I'm going to cover tonight. I want to talk about 5 reasons why you need to take gut health really seriously. Think about it as a root cause for dysfunction across all systems, regardless of what your passion is, regardless of what you are working on in your practice. How we are currently assessing gut health, as well as some other options. Tonight, I'm going to talk about the GI map test. It's kind of my favorite. I would say pretty much no matter who you are, no matter what you specialize in, without seeing you, without knowing you, I would say if you ask me, like, what is the one tool I need to have in my practice, this is probably it. Some common mistakes that I see in terms of interpreting these tests, in terms of protocol development in general. I'm going to share a quick little case study on an amazing client who came in with Crohn's disease, who had tried everything. And at the end of our work together, we actually just had our 3-year follow-up. We're not even working together, but she kind of pops in every once in a while. She's still in remission. So it's a really cool story. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit about my mentorship program if you decide that this is a tool that you absolutely need in your practice. So first, when it comes to thinking about gut health, I want you to immediately forget about everything you know about IBS and gas and bloating and just GI symptoms in general. The most dysfunctional guts that I see in my clinic are often in people who come in with 0 GI symptoms, but they have persistent acne. They have something going on that they can't get to the root of. They've tried everything. And finally, okay, well, I guess I'll look in the gut because I haven't looked anywhere else. And we find the craziest stuff. Honestly, sometimes I'm like, are you sure that you don't have like chronic stomach pain? It blows my mind. But our gut is the main way that we're interacting with our environment, right? From birth and even before now. I mean, most of us, I think, unless you're quite young and recently graduated, when you were in school, you're probably taught that the human GI tract is sterile until birth, and then it's colonized through the vaginal flora. We now know that that's not even true. They found probiotics in embryonic fluid. It's all around. So we start really building out our microbiomes, though, when we arrive on the planet. And the relationship between humans and microorganisms, whether it's bacteria or yeast or even like viruses, we've learned a lot about the virus biome in the last couple of years. Arguably, our relationship with these organisms are the most important relationships that we will ever participate in, whether it's coming from the food that we're eating, the water we're drinking. Every single thing that goes into our body is as much of an opportunity for a nutritional gain for our body as it is a vehicle for the microorganisms around us to communicate the state of the environment with our bodies. So the food that we're eating isn't necessarily just the macro and micronutrients. It's also information that your body is getting from the environment around us that's being delivered by little microorganisms every time you put something in your mouth. So just knowing that this is the primary way that our bodies are communicating with the environment around us, we should be thinking about this first and foremost when we start thinking about any dysfunction that you might be seeing in a client who's coming in. This is networking nutritionists, so I'm assuming that the vast majority of people who are going to be watching this workshop have some kind of nutrition degree, nutrition background. So you already know that nutrient status and nutrient deficiencies are truly at the root of so many dysfunctions in the body. But where do they come from? Aside from someone's diet being insufficient, this is the next most common cause, is what we are eating isn't actually being properly absorbed. So if you have someone who's coming in and they're like hitting up Chick-fil-A every day and haven't even got the memo that like, girl, you're supposed to eat protein and drink water, like have something green once in a while. Okay, if you got someone coming in like that, start with the basics, start with the foundations, absolutely, before you're ordering a $600 functional test for them. But if you run a practice like mine, you're probably getting some savvy people coming in. Like they understand, they've read the food guide, they're eating their 30 plants per week. Maybe they've tried a couple different diets already. So what's going on? Now we need to ensure that they have adequate digestive function. And we are never clinically going to see protein deficiencies, but we are going to see subclinical deficiencies where the person is having to eat so much in order to get barely enough nutrients to survive, let alone thrive with the energy and ability to show up in the way that they want to show up in their lives that most of our clients are looking for. We can see on blood work things like vitamin D, B12, these are low. These are also added into processed food at this point. So even these nutrients, it's not necessarily always an absence of diet sources. It's a lot of the time the food that's being eaten isn't necessarily being absorbed and metabolized properly. And being able to figure out what is actually going wrong there can solve the problem a lot faster. Inflammation. So this is another kind of root cause you might think of. Someone's coming in and you're like, oh, it's happening because of inflammation. You have PCOS because of this inflammation. But where is the inflammation coming from? So much inflammation in the body can be triggered and sustained by the state of the GI tract. I know a lot of us in our line of work would go ahead and say that any condition that presents with inflammation at all, we have to think of the gut. So if you're not already thinking this way, I really want to get you kind of on the same page as this, because my experience has definitely led me to believe that if there are symptoms, if there are imbalances, we're usually going to find something in the gut that we can piece together as probably driving this. Gut inflammation puts a huge stress on the body. You might have cases of just chronic adrenal burnout that you're seeing, and the person's trying everything and they're taking all the adaptogens. But if the call is coming from inside the house, like think of those creepy old babysitter movies, that's like what it's like to have inflammation in your gut. You can take all the adaptogens, you can do all the things, you can rest your butt off, but you're never going to feel better because your body's fighting this constant war. And also, especially in the last few years, we've gotten a lot more consumer interest in immune health and immune function. And this is an area where if you're, trying to communicate with someone who's a little bit older, maybe they're not super connected with their body. Again, maybe they don't have a lot of chronic digestive issues, but if their primary concern is immune health, or if they're getting sick all of the time, most of our immune function is actually coming from our gut. Our bacteria in our gut are constantly talking to our immune system, constantly talking to our brain. And we know that some organisms have kind of evolved to modulate the host's immune response in a way that's more favorable to them. So being able to screen for this and assess whether this could be a factor rather than just like throwing more vitamin C at the situation dropping Deep Immune into your water bottle every day, we can actually go a little bit deeper and help people get to the point where we're not having to constantly load them up with supplements to really boost their immune system because their innate immune response is finally healthy, maybe for the first time in a long time. And an area that I personally think is really interesting and why I highly encourage anyone who's even slightly interested in getting into this kind of niche right now to do so. The number one health complaint of millennials, which is my generation, is mental health. So anybody who's interested in this, like, now is a great time to get in. We have a mental health epidemic. I think this is definitely going to be the same for Gen Z. We are seeing, like, the kids are not okay right now. And obviously there are a lot of factors going on in the world that can contribute to this, but more and more research is coming out every week, it feels like, showing the interplay between what's happening in our clients' guts and what is happening with their mental state. Literally just last month, we had a really interesting study published that was the largest of its kind so far, comparing microbiome composition with emotions and finding that people who experience negative emotions were having higher concentrations of, it was two specific bacteria that really got kind of called out, really got a bad reputation. If you read the study, it was saying a lot more than that. I don't think we can blame those two bacteria necessarily, but it's showing just with this, first piece of research, how much more research there's going to be and how many more questions we are going to want to answer. So if you're interested in the gut-brain connection, I think now is an amazing time to really dive into that and become like an expert clinically in supporting this for your clients. And then when it comes to gastrointestinal symptoms, so all of those reasons to care about this aside, when it comes to gastrointestinal symptoms, if you've got someone who's got chronic digestive issues, they're going to be assessed typically using a 1 or 2, if they're lucky, traditional kind of labs. So the ways that gut health is currently being assessed include kind of routine labs. Maybe they have blood work from their family doctor. Maybe you're looking at vitamin D, you're looking at iron. If you're seeing that these things are low and you're screening their diet and you're seeing excellent sources of these nutrients, you're maybe thinking about absorption. Maybe they've had some specialty labs run, whether that's like stool testing through their physician, like a standard stool, ova, and parasite, breath testing, maybe for H. pylori, or if they've gone the functional route, maybe they've had a SIBO test or something like this. These can be used to identify imbalances, mostly infections, mostly like acute infections. Maybe they've had some imaging, ultrasounds, x-rays, MRIs. These are the types of tests where we're looking for swelling, some sort of structural abnormalities, obstructions. That's usually happening in a hospital, especially if you live in Ontario. It's hard to get anything other than in an emergency situation. And then, of course, we've got invasive procedures. So maybe they've been sent for colonoscopy, gastroscopy. They've had some actual tissue biopsied, and maybe they were diagnosed with some sort of pathology from that. Maybe they were totally cleared, but these are all things that you should be thinking about. I think it's important to be comfortable understanding how they work, understanding when to refer out for these types of tests, understanding what the findings mean, bringing all of this into your work with your client. But none of this is really stuff that as nutritionists, we're going to be ordering, right? So this is something where you need to be able to play well with others and work as a part of an entire healthcare team and like know your place, know your scope. And then what does this leave behind? So where are the gaps? I think that the biggest gap is in IBS, although we can definitely talk about IBD. I'm going to be sharing a case study, but if a client goes through any of those other testing methods and they fail to uncover a disease state, and then the client fits the criteria for IBS, which is basically that they have pain or discomfort, and it's been going on for more than 6 months, and it's associated with having a bowel movement, and there's no other obvious cause of disease, then boom, they get slapped with the IBS diagnosis. And a diagnosis of IBS just totally fails to acknowledge any specific imbalance. It's just basically acknowledgement of a set of symptoms. And although there are some super cool, very savvy dietitians in the space who are doing a really good job, I think, in the conventional model of supporting IBS patients, There's also a lot of people who are falling through the cracks, being handed a low FODMAP diet handout and kind of like sent on their way with no further support. So this is a big area where complementary practitioners like ourselves can kind of step in and say, hey, maybe there's more here. Maybe then we can run some more sensitive tests. Now that we know you don't have a terrible disease, let's just look for imbalances, right? We're not trying to diagnose anything, but like, let's understand what's going on here. If they do get diagnosed with something through that conventional testing, a diagnosis of something like inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's colitis, also kind of fails to give clients any answers as to what caused that disease state or any hope of influencing the outcome. It's just straight to medication. I regularly see clients in my practice who were told by their gastroenterologist that you can eat anything you want. It does not matter what you eat, which I just think is crazy. Imagine like a skincare expert saying, oh yeah, it doesn't matter what you put on your skin. Obviously, whatever you're rubbing against the organ that is ill all day, every day is going to have some sort of impact on the outcome. But not everyone thinks like that. That's why we're here. That's why we get to be the ones who think like that. And then clients who have a strong internal locus of control are immediately going to be having those red flags, right? They're being told, okay, so you're telling me I have ulcers inside of my intestine, but it doesn't matter what I put into my intestines. Like nothing is going to impact that. And the only way to help myself is to go get an injection every 4 to 8 weeks. Like these people immediately, they're in their bodies, they're connected with themselves. They know that something is not right, and they are going to be seeking out answers. They're going to be seeking out complementary practitioners. They know that there's got to be another way. And then they find you, right? And then you get to be the person who takes their hand and says, yeah, you're right. There's probably a little bit more than we can do. And it's not necessarily about replacing medication or replacing medical care, but it is about helping people understand their bodies a little bit better and give them back that sense of empowerment that they haven't just been dealt a terrible hand and have to live with it for the rest of their life. So I think of functional testing as something that can bridge that gap that's being left by conventional care to getting clients to living the way that they actually want to, aligning with their values and getting care that feels good to them. Gives you the information that you need to build a protocol based on what they have going on, while also still acknowledging the role that the medical field played in getting them to where they are now, and the role that they will continue to play in, the care that they're going to need, because we're all going to need medical care at some point. So it's all important. And I know that there's a lot of interest in kind of GI map stool testing. This is a tool that I really, really love. Cannot stress enough how much I think that this saves so much time and money and just energetic investment in our practice to be able to use a tool like this. So first, I want to explain what this is, because there's so much misunderstanding. I see it all the time, even from people who are using these labs. So GI map is an acronym. It's not an actual map. It's not like, oh, we're going to map your gut. It stands for microbial assay plus. So it's not just a microbiome test. There's other stuff going on. And there are a lot of different tests on the market. This is kind of the niche that I'm working in. So believe me when I say we are constantly assessing them in my clinic, constantly looking at what's on the market. This is just continually, for me, best bang for your buck, my favorite test to work with. It is hard to interpret. So I think that there are other labs dropping in, trying to scoop up practitioners that get intimidated by complicated labs with reports that are easier to read or that will tell you exactly what to recommend for your client. But in my opinion, this is consistently giving us the best data that's the most clinically relevant. It is a stool test. So it is a poop for science kind of situation. So your client has to take a stool sample. They can do it from the comfort of their own home. And it is analyzed using qPCR technology, which I don't really understand. I have a client who is like a PhD in genetics who teaches at a university, and she explained it to me one time, and it was like, whoop, a little bit over my head. But what I do know about this is that it's very different than a culture. So unlike a typical stool test that you're probably used to working with, where they're culturing it, they're leaving it, they're seeing what grows, or they're putting the sample under a microscope, they're visually looking at it and seeing if they see any organisms that can be identified, parasites, that kind of thing. Or a biopsy, for example, with H. pylori or a breath test. So this is just a very sensitive way of getting information. And because of this, it gives us a lot of information. And that's why it's important to know what to do with this information. I know I sound like a total shill right now. I am 100% not sponsored by Diagnostic Solutions Lab. I just want you to know about this tool because it changed my practice, and I believe in collaboration over competition. And I want you to know about the things that made my practice more successful so you can have a successful practice too. In terms of what we're actually assessing when we run a test like this, definitely microbiome analysis is a piece of it, but I would really strongly recommend that you not think of this as just a microbiome test. And also, we need to acknowledge that science on the microbiome is still very new. So although we have a lot of information about, we can run even more complex panels than this in terms of what is in someone's microbiome, we don't yet have data on the clinical relevance of that information. So although there are tests that will look at way more species, way more organisms, there's like short chain fatty acid ratios and everything you can get through stool tests, we don't really know whether or not that's what's associated with someone's symptoms yet. So what I'm really looking at when I'm looking at a GI map test, if we're looking at the commensal bacteria as well as the opportunistic bacteria, which absolute basic way of explaining this is like the good guys and the bad guys, right? So for good guys, we're looking for everyone to be around. I don't worry too much if there's slight imbalances, but if I see a panel like my client here on the left, who had pretty much across the board low or undetectable levels of a lot of bacteria that we do know play an important role in the microbiome, I'm not going to necessarily say, oh, girl, like you don't have enough Escherichia, so I'm going to go find an Escherichia containing probiotic for you. It's more about understanding that part of this person's picture and story for why they're having digestive problems is likely that they have a large amount of inflammation in the gut because all of the little critters who play a role in reducing inflammation are not coming to work. And also we know that these bacteria produce short chain fatty acids, and that those short chain fatty acids are the primary fuel of the enterocytes that line the gut. So we're probably not looking at a person who has a super healthy, robust gut lining either. And based on that, we're going to make some decisions about their protocol that aren't necessarily getting obsessed with the low levels of Enterobacter or the Faecalibacterium, finding a probiotic that puts that in a capsule. But without running this test, we wouldn't have known that, right? She's presenting with symptoms that sound like SIBO. If we don't have access to any testing, we might just be thinking like, maybe I'll put her on some oil of oregano, something that's going to do some killing, see if she feels better. And it's like dropping a bomb on an area that has like 3 survivors, and you just, shot her chances of feeling better even lower. And then on the flip side, when we're thinking about bad guys, things like opportunistic bacteria, this is where we can look and see certain organisms that we never really want to see in the gut. So things like the Citrobacter and Klebsiella, Proteus, we don't want to see these show up at all. So if they're there, that's going to tell us that, okay, this is a person who does have a lot of overgrowth for whom we might want to consider more of an eradication type of approach. These are from 2 different tests. I think it's important to clarify. If somebody had both of these side to side, then you have some major decisions to be making, but these are pulled from 2 different clients just to kind of show you extreme examples on either side of the spectrum. My favorite panel on the GI map, and I'm skipping over a few, we also look at H. pylori, we also look at parasites. There's a lot that we are told in terms of organisms, but where I'm always pointing my students to look and really spend the most time is in this intestinal health kind of section. So this is where we get to see, now we know what's showing up in the gut, how is that impacting the person? This is also really helpful if you are someone who works in the gut health niche. If you do bring in a lot of clients who have chronic digestive issues, this screenshot was pulled from a client who started having digestive issues a few years ago. So right around COVID times, she went to her doctor. They referred her to a gastroenterologist. She got a phone consult with the gastroenterologist and was told that she has IBS based on that phone consult with no further assessment done. So she went to a naturopathic doctor, and the naturopath did a SIBO test for her and told her she has SIBO. So they did a whole SIBO protocol, and she still wasn't quite feeling right. She came to my clinic as kind of a last resort. We ran this test, and she had undiagnosed inflammatory bowel disease that nobody caught. So this was actually a case of proctitis, which is inflammation, like right down at the bottom of the GI tract and kind of like the rectal area, lower part of the colon. And this is just something that, you're chasing your tail and buying so many supplements and taking so many tests and feeling like you're broken and feeling like you can't get to the root of what's going on. Whereas if instead of a SIBO test being ordered by a complementary health professional, a stool test had been ordered in the first place, we would have gotten a lot more information. We could have referred back to the gastroenterologist, got a colonoscopy, understood a full picture, got the proper diagnosis, and then move forward, which would have just been a better healing experience for this person versus being bounced around for the last several years before finally arriving at a proper diagnosis and being able to kind of make decisions about moving forward. You're going to find other stuff in this panel too. You can see digestive function. So if someone's got gallbladder issues that, again, you might never have known about, but you're seeing a ton of undigested fat in their stool, it's just adding an extra layer of information for you when you're building out your protocol, and also working as a part of their healthcare team, referring back for more testing, more information. Immune function. This is an example of someone who had really high overreactive immune system, but you're also going to see cases where the immune system is totally tanked, and maybe that's a chronic stress or burnout case that you need to address. Or maybe you'll see parasites or organisms that have clearly been taxing the body. It's just a really great way to get a lot of information, and it's an expensive test. It costs the client like $700. But when you consider the cost of repeat consults and multiple tried and failed protocols with all these supplements and stuff purchased, you can go through $700 really quickly. And on the other side of it, your client can either feel like, wow, I'm so excited to have this information, and I'm so excited now to implement this protocol because I'm a data-driven person and I feel confident in what we're doing. Or you just wasted $700. I don't feel any better. I've got a bunch of supplement bottles at home. I'm more confused than ever. And now you're trying to, convince me to do this other thing. You've kind of lost the trust. You've kind of lost it at that point. And we get a lot of those people in my clinic, and like, I don't love that. I don't love that for you. I don't love that for, as a business owner, like, I don't want you to lose business, even if it means that I gain business. I want natural health professionals to have such a high reputation that that when you're going to see somebody who does this kind of work, you're going to get a good result. And I want us to have an amazing reputation in the medical industry, that a physician knows that if they've got a functional health professional or holistic health professional on their patient's team, that they're going to get better results. I don't want to be catching cases that are falling through the cracks. I don't want cases falling through the cracks. So if I can save anyone time who is watching this, I am more than happy and excited to do so. So some mistakes that you might be making that are maybe causing these people to fall through the cracks that could totally be avoided if you had maybe better tools or even just a new way of thinking about things. First is obviously just misinterpreting results. So just because you have access to a lab or you can look at a lab doesn't always mean that we can understand it. I feel like this is a little bit different with nutritionists because we have to work so much harder just to even get access to ordering. So you have to go through extra certifications, you have to take trainings on these labs. So I do feel like when a nutritionist is getting GI map results, they're thinking about it a lot more critically than, for example, a naturopathic doctor who's just been hearing some buzz about it. They have ordering privileges, so they can just order it. And those are usually the cases that I'm seeing that are falling through the cracks, where things were totally misinterpreted, totally not the right decision that was made based on those test results. It's important to know that just like blood work, functional labs are using a range in their reporting based on what's normal, not necessarily what's healthy. So just because it's a functional lab doesn't mean they're using functional reference ranges. The GI map is a great example of that, where they'll say that something is normal, that, you'll see, oh, you have only normal levels of this parasite. There is no normal levels of a parasite, right? So you need to be able to interpret with care. And also to know how to go upstream and understand that maybe, although we're not happy about the parasite, we have to address the fact that the H. pylori is so high, because that is what is making this person vulnerable to parasites. Missing the actual root cause is another big one. A huge percentage of people that I'm seeing have already been treated for SIBO. SIBO has a relapse rate of 50% within the first year, 9 months. And then it gets higher as time goes on, because SIBO is a symptom. SIBO is not a root cause. And if you are somebody who does a lot of SIBO work in your practice, I know that can feel really triggering. I used to do that too. So I've definitely been there, like, what do you mean I can't? What do you mean I have to learn something new now? But also, if you're doing a lot of SIBO work in your business, I know that you already know about this relapse rate, and that there's a part of you that's already wondering what the heck is going on, and this isn't the holy grail that you thought it was going to be. So this is where we really need to see a shift around how we define root cause and how we're talking about gut health. As nutritionists, I have to call us all out on the role of diet and how we can tend to overestimate the role of diet, and other health professionals can underestimate the role of diet. And we really need to find some balance and find kind of like a happy medium in the center of these two extremes. Food alone is not enough to eradicate inflammatory bacteria. It's not enough to get rid of SIBO infection. It's not enough to get rid of parasites. It's not enough to get rid of a candida overgrowth. We cannot put this much pressure on diet for people. First of all, it's just not effective clinically, like it doesn't work. And second, it really messes people up. And again, my highest priority is that our profession has an incredible reputation. So if we're out here giving people eating disorders, this does not make any of us look good, right? If your colleague is doing something totally whack, then that's reflecting negatively on you. So we all need to understand that food plays an important role in protocols, but it also needs to be a part and not necessarily the whole picture, and not to the extent that we are damaging people's relationships with food. And on the flip side, we also need to, anyone who's just prescribing 10 supplements and barely addressing diet, or not even really making sure that their client's eating enough food in the first place before they start giving a big supplement protocol, also a big mistake. So we really need to understand the role of nutrition, when to use nutrition therapeutically, how to screen for if that's going to be appropriate if a client is coming in with an eating disorder. In the GI niche, if you're working in the GI niche, you are going to see a lot of gastrointestinal symptoms that are triggered by disordered eating. So you really have to learn how to screen for that, especially if you're working in this niche. I think that our clients are at much higher risk of having gone through something traumatic when it comes to food, and that's really showing up in their body now. Obvious one is just choosing ineffective products, inadequate doses. A lot of us are getting most of our continuing education through supplement companies when it comes to this kind of stuff. And that's great, like amazing that they're giving us free education, sign up for all of those things. But also it is important that you are having deeper conversations, that you're looking at the actual research rather than just recommending whatever the bottle is saying, because what's on the bottle isn't always going to be the therapeutic dose that was used in that clinical trial that showed that it was going to be effective. I built effective protocols over many years, thousands of clients. I made a lot of mistakes, and I am 100% about sharing that so that you don't have to go through and figure it all out. My dream in this life is that we just have one kind of central knowledge base where everyone is sharing everything that they learned, and you don't have to learn anything the hard way ever again. Okay, so let's talk about a quick case study. So this client, I love her so much. She had Crohn's disease diagnosed when she was a teenager. She was like 16, and she's a crunchy granola girl. She studies bugs for a living, and I guess her mom was like the same way, because even back then, her mom went and bought the specific carbohydrate diet book and learned about that, got her following this diet, and she was able to achieve remission after diagnosis as a teenager. She went off to university, she did her undergrad, she did her master's. And when she was in her master's, she started having symptoms again. Between these times, she had kind of slipped off following this special diet, but she got right back on it because she knew that it worked. The only issue is that this time it didn't work. So she was eating this super restrictive, I don't know if anyone knows the SCD diet, but it's quite restrictive and not really feeling better, still having a lot of bleeding. She was taking oral mesalamine, so she wasn't on a biologic, but with the symptoms she was having, that was kind of the next step for her. So she found her way to me, and it was kind of like, this is what we're going to try before bringing in a biologic medication. But she was so nervous about working with me because she had been following me on Instagram or whatever. And she just knew that I'm like not about restrictive diets. And she like sent me this long voice note saying, I really want to work with you, but I need to be on this diet. I'm not willing to eat off of the specific carbohydrate diet. And I said, no worries, we can work with it. So we ordered a GI map for her. We obviously found that she had uncontrolled Crohn's disease. You can see a lot of blood in her stool, moderately high calprotectin, obviously not as high as the previous IBD case, but still much higher than we want to see it. And in her case, we also found really high levels of fungal overgrowth and a parasite. So in terms of the exact protocol, we kind of did a couple different phases of this, but we took out a lot of she was having like excessive amounts of honey, because I guess it's the only sweetener on the SCD that is legal, as they call it. So she was having like tons and tons of honey, eating lots of, I think it was bananas. So she's definitely had like a high carbohydrate diet, but a super restrictive high carbohydrate diet of only whole foods. And she was eating very healthy. So we just kind of redirected her more to like blood sugar management and protein, and brought in some herbs, really gentle stuff, because she was very sensitive. This client actually broke out into a full body rash just from removing like honey and bananas and still eating carbohydrates. But that's how severe this fungal overgrowth was. And if you look at this number, so the lab, we want to see 0 candida. The lab won't flag it as high if it's under 5,000, but she's at 90,000, right? E is exponent. So every time we go up an exponent, we go up a decimal point. So this number is actually 10 times higher. So this is a really high amount of candida to have in your gut. And then there was another type of yeast in there as well. So we just brought in some gentle antifungal herbs, not even like oil of oregano, like really, really gentle stuff. And she did this for about 3 months, messaged me on month 2 that it was the first time that she wasn't seeing blood in her stool in years. We did a follow-up test. Her calprotectin went from like off the charts to 5, which she cried. She said it was the lowest she'd ever seen it. And this is a great like before and after to look at clinically, but I just also really want you to understand the emotional impact of this. So after we got these test results back in, I nudged her and I said, like, we can always get you back to this point, right? Like, this is your new baseline. We can always bring you back here. How do you feel about eating some sweet potato for the first time in years? And she started reintroducing foods that she hadn't eaten in years and years. She's now 3 years out from this protocol, almost 4 years out from this protocol. She's eating a wide variety of foods. She's still in remission. And it's just being able to see someone go from being sick and doing everything in her power to not be sick, being sick and being limited in every choice that she makes because of how crappy she feels and how desperately she wants to feel better, to being able to live her life and not think about this and not identify as like, I'm sick, I have Crohn's disease, I can't eat that because of my Crohn's disease, and just kind of live like a normal person. Also totally left this out, but she did also get off of the medication that she was taking. So not only did she not graduate to a biologic, but she was able to get off of the oral mesalamine. And this isn't every IBD case, and this isn't always the goal, but this is just a really good example of what can happen when we are able to get the right information. Because without this tool, without this information, what are we working with? Therapeutic diet. She was already doing that. So what do? Take out even more foods from her diet, put her on an even stricter protocol. assume that she's got something going on and try a bunch of different stuff, which in a very sensitive body could trigger a reaction. In her case, that would definitely have been the case. Like she had a full body rash just from cutting down on her sugar intake. So in a case like this, the extra cost of running a test to get the information ends up saving so much time, money, and energy. And now this is a person who has referred me so many clients who absolutely trusts me versus, someone who had a bad experience, got a stressful protocol that made them feel like crap, and is never going to send anyone else your way. So there's so many, it's better for the client, it's better for you. There's so many benefits to practicing in a more like data-driven way. And if you have any questions tonight, I'm happy to answer them. But really quickly, I want to talk about how I actually teach this stuff. So we have an advanced gastrointestinal clinical mentorship program. We've graduated 2 rounds so far, and this is designed for people who are already working in clinical practice. So you're already seeing clients. We are expanding it a little bit. So we're building out the curriculum actually quite a bit for the next round to make it a little bit friendlier for new grads. So if you are maybe just at the beginning of practice and you're wanting to specialize more in the GI niche, we've got you, whereas previously we would have turned you away. But if your goal is really to be able to understand how to use these tools in your practice, understand gastrointestinal anatomy and physiology and what's actually going on, like what does it mean when you get a client with eosinophilic esophagitis? I didn't hear about that before the first client I saw who had that. So just understanding a little bit more how to work with people, how to build out protocols. We do teach GI map testing, how to get this into your practice, especially as unlicensed providers. I'm assuming, this isn't called networking NDs. So I'm guessing we're mostly like unlicensed providers in the house here. And most importantly, like being able to order the test, I cannot stress enough, is the smallest hurdle to jump. Getting familiar with how to interpret the findings, how to build out protocols. I have taken a lot of continuing education in my career, and I like to learn through case studies. I like to see what another practitioner did. I like to see the protocols that were used. I like to see the before and after, what were the issues. So we do a lot of that kind of teaching. And throughout this process, we also allow you to submit case studies. So we're encouraging you from the very first week that you're taking this program to start ordering GI maps. And I promise once you get the results, you'll have support in knowing what to do with them. And you can submit case studies, get support with building out your protocols, ask questions. It's such an amazing little community that we have. And I'm really putting more energy in my practice to this side of things, just because I kind of ran this as a one-off because I was getting so many requests from colleagues for support. And it has turned into such an incredibly supportive community where people are like posting in the Facebook group every day that I never anticipated it would go down like this. And we're not open for enrollment right now. So I just like hyped you up to like drop you flat on the ground. But if you want to join the waitlist, we are giving $500 off to everyone who's on the waitlist when enrollment reopens. We're relaunching with a much beefier curriculum. So there's going to be a price increase, but you're not going to have to pay that. And if you want, I put the URL on the screen here for how you can go sign up for that waitlist. And maybe we can like also put it in the replay email or something. And I did not think to give you any social media handles or anything like that. So hopefully you find me if you need me. For anyone who's here live, I'm happy to answer questions. But if you have questions and you're catching the replay, feel free to shoot me a DM.
Yes, we can definitely put all of your social handles on the replay in the group. And we do have a bunch of questions that have come in already. So let's jump right into those, I guess. Jessica asked, you said, quote, we, when you were talking about this mentorship program. So are you the main practitioner teaching the program, or are there other practitioners teaching along with you?
Yeah, good question. It is, I would say, like primarily myself, but I do also have an assistant nutritionist who works in my practice. She's amazing. She also has functional medicine training and specializes in GI health as well. So we do kind of tag team it. So you're getting a couple of brains, and I'm with clients a lot. So it's just nice to have an extra brain instead of hands around.
There's another question here. You mentioned the before and after during that case study. So would clients need to pay each time they do the GI map in order to be able to compare?
Yes, 100%. So with labs, like this is a direct cost to your business and it's a direct cost to the client. So in any case where you're ordering it, as of right now, it's May 2023. Like as of right now, the cost to your business for a GI map is around like $550, $600, depending on where they're located, maybe a little bit less. So you're invoicing like $550, $600. I think it's costing you like $450, $500. I am a bad business owner right now. I should know numbers better than this.
It does depend on the exchange rate too for us in Canada.
It depends on the exchange rate. It depends on the shipping. I don't really make money on labs in my practice. Like I charge the minimum that I have to charge in order to cover, obviously like fluctuations in the exchange rate, the actual direct cost to my business, and then the tax burden of making money. So I'm kind of just charging based on that. And I charge $600 for a GI map. So it's going to cost you around $600. Not everyone needs to retest, but also, just knowing that this question is like coming from a place of like, whoa, that's a lot of money. Even if you are not personally ready to spend that much money on things, does not mean that other people aren't. And also, when you are upfront with like, it costs a lot to work with me, and we're going to get information that you have never gotten access to before, you get more dedicated clients. You get more like data-driven, left-brained clients who are really engaged and excited and actually going to be compliant and actually going to turn out to be an incredible testimonial for you. So even though it's a higher investment to be using tools like this in your practice, and you would think like, if it costs more money, I'm going to get fewer clients. I cannot stress enough that was so the opposite situation in my practice. When we added things that increased the value, even though it increased the price tag, we saw a huge increase in client acquisition rates and conversion rates and like all the KPIs that you want to see as a CEO.
Amazing. Another question here. Where do you go to stay up to date with research on gut health?
That is a really good question. I'm always trying to kind of build this out. So I really like Dr. Mark Ruscio. He is a clinician, but he's also doing a lot of research. So I keep up with like the research that he and his team are doing. He works more on like, I don't think he's actually with clients one-on-one. So he's a little bit more in like sharing information, talking about new studies. I also have like Google alerts set up for like PubMed and different like research kind of access points for different studies in gut health. And I'm also like a nerd. Like I don't have other stuff going on, you guys. So this is kind of like all I'm doing. All my friends are also health professionals. So it also just kind of comes up. That's another like one day goal project, is having some kind of amazing little research hub where we can all easily access things without having to sleuth.
Another question here. Are you able to say a little bit about the high B-glucuronidase that was showing up when you had the case study on screen?
Yeah, so beta-glucuronidase is an enzyme in the gut. You know about phase 1 and phase 2 liver detoxification. Phase 3, which isn't really a real thing, but that's what happens in the gut, right? So after the toxins or hormones or whatever are conjugated, they're going into the gut, they're going to be eliminated. When beta-glucuronidase enzyme activity is elevated, it is allowing glucuronidation to be undone. So I always use the example of estrogen. If your liver pulls in a bunch of excess estrogen and says, whoa, like this is too much estrogen, let's get it out of here, packages it up into little boxes, ties a nice bow, pops it into the bile goes into the GI tract, everything in the GI tract is going to the toilet. So this is how we're getting things out of the body. And then these little nice boxes of estrogen are going by, and our beta-glucuronidase is like scissors that's cutting off the ribbon, opening up the box and allowing all the estrogen to run back into the body. So when you see that elevated, you want to be thinking about detoxification. You want to be thinking about burden on the liver. And also, you're going to see that a lot in like endometriosis cases, estrogen dominance cases, and you're going to want to think about hormonal health as well.
Do you have any thoughts about ordering the GI map with or without zonulin added and what the indications might be?
Yeah, that's such a good question, Veronica. So I don't order it with zonulin, and I encourage my clients to not order it with zonulin. It's about $100 extra, and it is not going to give you $100 worth of information. We can always assume intestinal permeability, and it's not going to actually change your protocol, or it shouldn't. If you're, 100%, like this is my belief, my philosophy. But in my opinion, if you are practicing the way that you should be, then seeing zonulin high or not isn't actually going to change anything about your protocol. So you're not going to pay an extra $100 of your client's money to get that information.
And then the last question, one more popped up. Okay, so last two questions that we've got here. How is SIBO tested? And regarding that ND and client that came to you, does the GI map catch SIBO too? And what did SIBO testing miss that the GI map captured? It's kind of a three-part question there.
Okay, so part one, how is SIBO tested? It is a breath test. So people will follow a special diet where they're like eliminating carbohydrates and then like fermentable carbohydrates. You pretty much just eat like rice or bread and meat for 3 days. And then you drink a sugar solution, and then you're exhaling into tubes and breathing, and then they're measuring the gas. So this is coming from the small intestine. There's certain periods of time after you drink the solution when you're breathing, and that's when we know that the solution would be in your small intestine, or should be. There are many limitations to SIBO testing. The GI map does not catch SIBO in the sense that we are taking a stool sample, so it's coming from the large intestine. So we absolutely cannot say that what we're seeing is SIBO. A lot of people who are ordering GI maps are saying SIBO when they see dysbiosis on the GI map. So this is a huge pet peeve of mine. Like if you have that much of a misunderstanding, you should not be using this lab. So no, the GI map does not catch SIBO, but there is a reason why people are saying this, because there are certain bacteria, Pseudomonas, Klebsiella, that are associated with SIBO and that are known to potentially be overgrowing in the small intestine. You can't say that for sure, but the approach in terms of how to eradicate them isn't going to be any different than if you got the information from a SIBO test. So $500 for a SIBO test, $600 for a GI map. The protocol isn't really going to be different, but you're going to get a lot more information from the GI map. And what did SIBO testing miss that the GI map covered? So this individual was told that they have SIBO. However, that test should never have been ordered because she was chronically constipated. So again, if you think you know enough to be ordering these labs, then you should have known that you cannot get accurate SIBO test results in a chronically constipated client. So of course she tested positive for SIBO, and then she was treated with a bunch of, I think she actually went I can't remember if she went antimicrobial or antibiotic route, but whatever, she was killing a bunch of this bacterial overgrowth. What it missed was that she had high calprotectin, which is inflammation in the intestine. She had tons of blood in her stool, which was invisible, right? Fecal occult blood isn't necessarily visible to the naked eye. She had a severely upregulated immune response. So when I look at all of that information, I immediately said, thankfully, she works at a hospital, like she's a physician. And I was like, you need to get yourself in for a colonoscopy stat. And she was able to do that. So it's a situation where it was just one piece of information, gases, versus a ton more information, microbiome, inflammation, immune function, all kinds of other things that were able to tell us what was going on. I think that answered all three pieces.
Yes, definitely. Thank you. And then the last question we have here, do you see in your practice that it's getting harder and harder to get rid of H. pylori? And if so, why do you think that is? And any other tips on getting rid of it?
Yeah. Okay. So H. pylori is hard to get rid of. That's like the whole thing. It co-evolved with us for, I don't even know, thousands of years at this point. There was some going back to my archaeology brain, you can literally track the migration of humans based on what strain of H. pylori is in the area, which is kind of cool. So given that it's co-evolved with us for so long, it has developed a lot of antibiotic resistance. Medically, they treat H. pylori with 2 to 3 antibiotics as well as a proton pump inhibitor. So it's acknowledged medically that like this is an antibiotic resistant organism. We need to throw everything we got at it. The good thing is that as natural health practitioners, herbal eradication agents are less likely to have resistance evolved against them, but it still happens. So depending on the protocols you're using, some things that I've seen that are contributing to the H. pylori not being eradicated is just like inappropriate choice of herbs used. A lot of people are using GastroMend from Designs for Health. I think DSL, which is the lab that does the GI map, actually recommends this. If you like call them with a consult, they'll tell you to like use GastroMend to get rid of H. pylori. I don't know why, because it like does not work at all. And it's never worked in my experience. And I've never really seen it work in any of my mentorship cases. So just making sure that you're using the right stuff, and also that you're using like broad spectrum, maybe multi-herb formulas. Another cause for why it might not be eradicated is that it is transmittable. So we'll see cases where it's not going away. Just literally had one yesterday where my client did a whole H. pylori protocol and it came back higher than before. And I was like, all right, time to get hubbies in here. And we did an not H. pylori, we did a GI map on him, and his H. pylori was like crazy, like 10 times the upper limit. So you also want to think about, if you have a case like that, that it could be kind of transmitted back and forth. You might need to bring the whole family into it. And then sometimes it's really easy. Like I've also seen people drink Matula tea and get rid of their H. pylori forever. So it's really hard to tell whether you're going to be working with an easy case or a hard case, but it's not just you. And my tip is be comprehensive, read the actual research on what has been shown to be effective against H. pylori, and retest. Oh my gosh, retest.
That's such an important point about potentially needing to bring the rest of the family in. And that doesn't even just apply to H. pylori. There's other microbes that would apply to as well. That in my experience, clients are like, what do you mean I'm catching this back from my husband? He doesn't have any of the same symptoms that I have. And so there's that opportunity for that education, right? Of how different people's bodies and all the other different things that might be going on could be contributing.
100%. The men never have any symptoms. Their GI map is like 10 times worse. They're not in their bodies all the time.
So I guess the last question I'll ask you then is just if there's anything else that you haven't covered yet that you want to mention, and before we log off, any other resource?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, that's everything. I have some other fun stuff cooking. So if you want to like follow me on Instagram or find me somewhere in the metaverse, and also just to say again that like I'm always excited to connect. So if you have questions, if you caught the replay, but you have a follow-up question or something, come find me.
Yeah, that's awesome. This was a very concise hour. You fit a lot of information just into 1 hour. So this is wonderful. Thank you.
Amazing. It was my absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, you guys.
Yes, and thank you for being here. All right. Thank you to those of you who were able to attend live, and for everyone who stuck it out on the replay right till the end. And Ashley, thanks one more time for being here tonight. This was great.